and Icon.
You know, I was the one who convinced the Icon to become a hero in the first place. I should be outside celebrating with him, not hidden away in here.
Welcome to our world.
Word to wise, grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple eyes. You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's your boy Ernie, the Blerd Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. So recently I was talking about reintroduction of Icon into DC Comics universe history with the release of the new History of DC Comics #1, and I realized it had actually been a long time since I had talked about Icon in any meaningful fashion. And I looked back and I was like, oh wow, I used to have this video that I did about him, but honestly I kind of wanted to go back and, revisit him with a fresh pair of eyes, because at the time when that video was released, there was no rebooted Milestone continuity. So now that there is one, I kind of want to dive into that character, kind of see what has changed. I also kind of wanted to point out some things that I don't really talk about in regards to Icon in that video. Let's get right to it. When I was talking about Icon, and more specifically when I was talking about the notion that there were other black supermen that existed in the DC Comics universe, someone came along and gave me the argument that usually tells me, off top, you're a racist and anything you say is invalid. When I mentioned that characters like President Superman, Val-Zod, Sunshine Superman, and the Superman of Earth D existed, the person in question just retorted with,
"Yeah, created by two white men."
It's a common phrase whenever a white racist nerd, supposed nerd, tries to minimize the importance of a black superhero. But the funny thing about that is that talking point is almost always used within the same breath as make your own heroes, stop stealing ours, stop race swapping my favorite superheroes. But whenever black people do make their own superheroes, then suddenly they don't like that either. And while those black versions of Superman exist in DC Comics, Milestone was actually pretty proactive. Granted, their version of a quotey fingers black Superman didn't arrive until 1993, and this was largely thanks to the late Dwayne McDuffie and the late MD Bright. But what I found very interesting about this is that DC Comics wouldn't take their black Supermen more seriously until after the fact, and at least a decade or two later. In a lot of respects, Milestone did Black Superman in a way that no one else could, and in a lot of respects, no one else has actually legitimately done to this day, not even DC Comics, and they have 4 Black Superman to their credit, and they couldn't even do this. That's because Milestone Media created a Black Superman who was not only Superman, but an allegory for black leadership, discord within the black community, and a metaphor for pointing out that sometimes even black people don't get it when it comes to the fight against white supremacist power structure. When Dwayne McDuffie and MD Bright breathed life into Icon, the assignment was simple. Not all skin folk are kinfolk. Let's chop it up. In 1993, Milestone Media, a fully black-owned comic book publishing company, launched one of the most ambitious comic books to date, Icon, a series that focused on a black superhero who was, for all intents and purposes, Superman, who existed in a comic book universe where the majority of superheroes would also be black, the Dakotaverse, which was very unlike mainstream comics at the time, something that would be emulated by DC Comics years later down the road when their introduction of Earth 23 hit the DC universe, a world not that dissimilar from Milestone's Dakotaverse. But who was Icon? He was an alien, not unlike Superman, but one who did not look like a human. He was very obviously not of this earth. But regardless of whether you follow current Milestone continuity or the original Milestone continuity, he crash landed on Earth during the 1800s in the American South, Georgia to be specific. When his ship crashed, it was designed to transform its passenger's DNA to match the DNA of the first intelligent life form to approach it. And in this case, that was a black woman, a slave who happened to see the ship crash. Not only did it turn Icon from an alien to a black human male, but it also turned him into a child to make him more likely to be taken in and cared for by whoever found him. Now, this is for all intents and purposes the exact same origin as Superman. Only Icon is not the last of his species, nor is his planet or former society destroyed. The Terminus is still very much a very real thing. They're still out there. It's just that he is so far away from them that he's not in any danger of bumping into them very often. And as a matter of fact, over the course of his comic series, he would leave Earth occasionally to go visit with the Terminus, and usually would mean Rocket would either need to step up or someone else would need to step in and take his place. But he and Superman shared a lot of the same abilities. This is largely thanks to his crashed spaceship having not only transformed him at the molecular level into a human, but also having greatly enhanced every aspect of his natural Terminian physiology alongside his new human genetics. This means he's superhumanly strong enough to lift at least 100 tons, and that's on the low end. He has been depicted as lifting this much effortlessly, and his strength, like Superman's, is believed to be limitless, and the amount of force that he can place into a single strike is enough that even Superman himself was of the belief he'd never been hit that hard by anyone, even Darkseid, who at the time was one of the strongest beings Superman had faced. Now, Superman does not mention Doomsday, and some might think that that's because the death of Superman had not yet occurred. It actually had. So there's that. He doesn't mention Doomsday in that comparison, largely because DC very likely wanted to keep Doomsday booked as very strong. So I would say that Icon's probably the closest thing in force potential that Superman has ever faced, other than Doomsday. Just like Superman, Icon is also invulnerable to practically anything on Earth. The only things that have ever seemed to hurt him are similarly powered super beings. Bullets of any caliber, energy blasts, extreme temperatures, falls from terminal velocity, even the uninhabitable conditions of the vacuum of space don't seem to bother him. And anything that can actually hurt him, he can heal from in a matter of hours for minor damage and a matter of days for more grievous wounds. Look no further than Icon being nearly torn to shreds by the Shadow Cabinet member Payback. Icon's wounds were already healing by the next scene of the same issue, a mere page turn away. Icon is also superhumanly fast, though the exact rate of speed he can travel is unknown, but it's safe to assume that if he can keep up with Superman, a man fast enough to keep pace, but not outpace, Wally West, who is considered to be the fastest being in all the multiverse, then Icon is likely on the same level as Superman. We also know Icon, like Superman, is fast enough to appear to be in two places at once and move from one spot to another in the blink of an eye. And because of his speed, he's also able to perceive the world around him at normal speed, despite moving so fast, and he can react to incoming attacks and projectiles, even if they're moving faster than the normal human eye can see. And because his speed is so great, this means his reflexes, his agility, all must match. Even his stamina, which I would imagine would make sense considering we've seen Icon exert himself for hours, even days on end, and he's barely broken a sweat. It will also likely not surprise you that Icon can see, hear, smell, taste, and touch on a level that is considered superhuman. While Icon's heat vision and super breath was more of a thing in the rebooted Milestone universe, both work on the same level, though Icon's heat vision is on a level more similar to the Boy's character, Homelander. He has more recently used his heat vision to cut Vandal Savage, a superpowered being able to go toe-to-toe with most superheroes in the DC Comics universe, in half. And when it comes to energy manipulation, he's been depicted as being able to control the energy in other heroes and villains' weapons, and even with their own abilities. He can also manipulate energy throughout his body as well, being able to fire off concussive energy blasts that have been proven to knock most people unconscious. And not only can he fire these blasts from his hands, he can use that same energy to fuel his already impressive stopping force when it comes to his punches. Another trick the rebooted Icon has that the original didn't is telekinesis, though we don't really see him use it terribly often, similarly to how Superman has telekinesis, but we don't really ever actually see Superman use it on any major level outside of his invulnerability. And while Icon is hundreds of years old by now, having already been a grown-ass man when he first crash-landed on Earth prior to being turned into a child, he's lived in secret on Earth since the 1800s. 1843 if you go by the rebooted timeline. But to look at him, he barely looks like he's in his late 30s, and he's lived under the guise of various descendants of himself for a long time, growing up in chattel slavery to eventually becoming a Union soldier and eventually becoming a lawyer. And while he's lived and died multiple times from a legal standpoint, it's always been just him. Icon is quite literally the ultimate black don't crack. And while he doesn't seem to have this ability in the original timeline, in the rebooted timeline, one trick Icon does have is that he can shapeshift backward and forward between his human form and his alien form. Though this is something that we don't really see him use terribly often. It pops up here and there, and technically in the original timeline, we would occasionally see Icon's actual true face, but it seemed less like shapeshifting and more like just the veil of who he was slipping to someone who was looking at him. That's the way I've always kind of viewed it. For all of the similarities that Icon and Superman have with one another, Icon actually got to bear witness to and be a part of something that Superman had never gotten the opportunity to. And it's one of the darkest parts of American history, and that's slavery. As I mentioned earlier, Icon crash landed on Earth during the 1800s. And as you would imagine, being taken in by black slaves, he was also technically a slave himself. This actually puts him on Earth almost an entire century before Clark wound up in Kansas. And as a result of this means that Icon has a very unique perspective on the world, and technically, by a lot of respects I would say, Superman probably has a very different set of politics than Icon, even if you would expect it to maybe be different. This is an area that a lot of readers tend to take umbrage with because despite being a black Superman, Icon is often called out for not doing anything about slavery. And technically he did. Even in the original series, he just never made his presence as a superhero known, but he's touched multiple moments across black history in his own way. And when we got to the rebooted Milestone universe just a few years ago, it was shown why he didn't do more. Because a similarly powered alien being named Benedict Lord also crash landed with Icon, an alien shapeshifter who was already a wanted criminal and sided with the slave masters. Not only was Benedict Lord evil and a racist SOB, but he was also the one who killed Superman in the rebooted Milestone universe. He literally snuffed him out when he was still a baby in his crib. And while Icon tried to end slavery in the rebooted timeline, he met his match with Benedict Lord, a being who, unlike Icon, was murderous, unscrupulous, and completely devoid of morals, but had many of the exact same abilities that Icon had. Whereas Icon was a man who honored and cherished doing what's right but not at any cost, it became clear his presence only meant Benedict Lord would do far worse, so he acted more quietly. And while technically season 1 of Icon and Rocket gives hints and teases to things that Icon was a part of and worked towards during the days between now and the 1800s, we never actually get to see that. There's actually one particular scene in the first issue of Icon and Rocket season 1 where we see him talking to somebody who looks eerily like Rocket, very likely one of Rocket's, ancestors, maybe a grandmother, great-grandmother, or something, along those lines. And yeah, we never really go back to that. I mean, it basically just kind of uses a way to let you know why Icon listens to what Rocket has to say and values what she says as a person. But yeah, it's like, interesting. Yeah, once again, I hope one day we go back to that. Would be nice. One thing you have to take note of with Icon is that, well, yes, he is Black Superman, but he is Black Superman with an asterisk. And that's for good reason. He is not actually black, not by birth. I mean, yes, his genetic structure, his DNA is changed to be that of a black man. And yes, he did grow up within the confines of a black man's struggle once he got to Earth. However, he was a whole ass other person before he got there. And I think that's something people tend to forget about. I get it. It's a very fast way to just explain who Icon is without having to do a lot of heavy lifting. But that statement is doing a lot of heavy lifting because Icon was a whole other person who had a completely already dead set, core framework of ideals and things that he believed. And it wasn't until he got to Earth that he was like, oh, okay, maybe this is a little bit different, but he never really changed much. And I think people tend to forget that. It's like they forget that dude's an alien. And don't get me wrong, technically, Icon was, quotey fingers black before he was turned into a black man. He was actually more jet black in the way that it worked. I mean, yeah, he was Terminian. He was a part of a greater collective and what was effectively a cosmic utopia, but it was a cosmic utopia that had its own set of problems. He had this whole, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, even before he got to Earth. He was black, but not black the way that black people are. Yes, he looked like a black man. His struggle was not really exactly the same. The thing about Icon people need to understand is that he was a staunch conservative. Even Dwayne McDuffie has gone on record to say that Icon was based off real-life Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who himself is a real-life Uncle Ruckus, who's tried multiple times throughout his career to undercut the Voting Rights Act, has been credibly accused of sexually harassing Anita Hill, and has been credibly accused of being the most corrupt Supreme Court judge in United States history, having
allegedly
taken bribes from millionaires and billionaires for decades, and Clarence Thomas's own wife, Jenny Thomas, even
allegedly
attempted election fraud by
allegedly
attempting to coerce lawmakers in Arizona and Wisconsin to not certify the 2020 election and allow Joe Biden to be president. Anyway, that was a tangent, but that was all to say that while Icon is skinfolk, he is not kinfolk. And he's constantly reminded of this with his every action. Over the course of his 42-issue series back in the 90s, there are at least a handful of times where Rocket had to G-check Icon and remind him who he was, and more importantly, what he looked like. It's kind of funny, there's a couple of different instances in the Icon story that stick out to me. One of them actually does not actually happen, but based on some things we see Icon do about 10 issues later, you're kind of like, was it really speculative fiction? There's an issue of Icon number 18 where his partner, Rocket, is writing a little piece of fan fiction about what would happen if Icon was approached by a shady corporation in order to give him the tools that he needs to fix his ship and return back to his original home amongst the other Terminians. It becomes this exercise in how far would Icon go, because at a point in that little speculative story, it's revealed that the only way this corporation will help him is if, when they fix his life ship, that they use the technology within him to transform him from being a black man into a white man. And once again, I want to point out, this doesn't actually happen per se. This is just Rocket speculating on what could happen if a situation like this arises. But when we get to issue number 28, it actually comes up. Icon is suddenly all in for this thing called the Utopia Project. It's a revitalizing of Dakota City, and they're building this park called Utopia Park that basically is a metaphor for gentrification, where they're trying to revitalize Dakota by bringing in affluent white people into the city and basically doing away with all of the black jobs within Dakota, especially in the Utopia Park area, and replace them with white people. And yeah, the neighborhood ain't feeling it, and Rocket ain't either. And while Icon recognizes that everyone's angry with him for being the face of the Utopia Park project, he's not necessarily immediately willing to back out on it, and kind of slick for the same reasons. At the end of the day, Icon realized that Earth was being observed by the not so much species, but the collective that he hails from. What he was trying to do is he was trying to do the most good he thought humanly possible to maybe make Earth a better place, but he went about it the wrong way, thinking that, oh, well, we just gentrify everything. Yeah, it's gonna make everything better. No, it's not. It's not going to do that. At this point, we're literally talking like issues 30, 33, 32, somewhere in that neighborhood of the original Icon series, just to kind of show you how even later in the series, he was still kind of on that Fox News bullshit. And the thing is, all of his reasonings for why he kind of looked, I won't say down on humanity, but just kind of had this dismissive attitude towards whether or not humanity should be allowed into the collective is another story altogether. But even he can't say that, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is always going to work. Because yeah, even though he was an alien with jet black skin who became a human with just, normal human black skin, he still had the benefit of privilege. He had the benefit of longevity. It literally took Icon several lifetimes to amass the wealth that he now has that has far removed him from the struggle that most normal everyday black people have to deal with. So yeah, he's so far removed from the game that he forgot what it was to be who he was. So whereas you had a Superman who had a ma and a pa Kent to teach him right from wrong, give him moral structure, and set him out into the world to do the thing he's going to do, it's not to say Icon didn't have that, but he is so far removed from that he's lost his way. And Rocket is the reason he finds his way back to it. And that's a large bit of the commentary that Dwayne McDuffie offered with this character. And that's why a lot of times, a lot of people, if you are, in and around my age, I'm 42.
Damn! I'm sorry.
I often would say that while Icon is the star of the story, it's his book, he's got the top billing, Rocket is actually the voice of Dwayne McDuffie speaking to the reader. And I don't remember exactly what issue this was. I'll have to go back and look. But if you ever can find access to some of the old Milestone issues and look in the letters page, the creative team behind Icon pretty much confirms this. And when you look even further into who Icon is as a character, because we gotta remember, when we meet Icon in issue number 1 of his series, he's not a superhero. He was just living his life as a lawyer and very likely a member of the GOP, because we gotta remember, he was a conservative, he was a Republican, and because of his money, power, and status, he very likely did some campaigning, donating, some endorsing for the Republican Party in a time where it was the party of Reagan. The reason Icon is a superhero is not because of his upbringing. It's not because of, his parentage or his life experiences. Icon is only Black Superman because of Rocket. A black woman called him out on his buffoonery, and that is why he is the hero that people love him for. She was always there to keep him on the straight and narrow path, to constantly remind him when he was messing up. And I would even dare say, if there was no Rocket, there would be no Icon. And while yes, I think that Icon's political leanings do make him a less attractive Black Superman in terms of the pantheon of all the different characters who can kind of jump towards that moniker, I will say I think he's the more interesting one, because while yes, Black Superman, which is, as I've always kind of long believed, is a bit of a misnomer, yes, he's similar to Superman, but makes his journey unique is that he didn't start out the way that Superman did. He had to become the way that he was. Therefore, we're following that journey, and I think it makes it a little bit more impactful, but that's just me. I don't know. You guys tell me what you think about Icon. Do you like him? Do you love him? You know, did you know about him before today? I know a lot of people who I've spoken to recently who had no idea that Icon even existed. So yeah, you guys tell me what you think about him. And if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you tap that notification bell as well, so that way you don't miss out on any of my videos, because, you know, YouTube, I like to play in my face sometimes with these videos and not put them in front of everybody's eyes. And also, if you're still here at this point, hit that like button too, because it'll help you find more videos just like this one, and it'll help me find more viewers like yourself. Anyway, we out of here. Keep it plus ultra till next time. Peace.